9 o'clock. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us. I encourage you, if you know other people who are not part of today's session, to see if they can log in either tonight at 7 or this afternoon at 2. My goal today is to go over some items that we have been discussing as a district to help parents understand where we are, what we have to do as a district, as well as give parents an opportunity, or anybody on the line, an opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to be upfront and honest with you. Some of these questions we are still working through logistically, with the hope that we have in our final plan August 10th, which is what we have to present to the board. So I'm going to go over a couple things. One is the executive order, which started this whole process for us. A quick overview of the return to school roadmap, what we're required to do, and the recommendations. Talk a little bit about where we are in developing our plan and when that has to be submitted. Talk about what we have done as an organization to date and what is coming down the road in the next couple of weeks. And then finally talk about the virtual option that we're going to be offering parents to give you a glimpse of what that would look like. And then again, I'll leave it up to questions and answers at the end. So I want to start with, and I have everybody muted right now, but you should be able to unmute yourself. So when we get to the question and answer, just feel free to unmute yourself, and then we can, if there's a problem, wave, and I'll see what I can do on my end. But let me start with kind of where we are as an organization and how we got there. If you have not seen this yet, this is the actual executive order that started the return to school process. It is available on our website. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I do want to point out a couple of the highlights. So when you look at this, the beginning part's more of an overview of why we are in the situation we're in. But if you go down to the page, I believe it's page 3, it talks about a preparedness plan that schools must comply with. And in case you didn't know, the governor has established basically 6 phases that the state is placed in. Phase 6 is we're back to normal. For school systems, if we are in phase 1, 2, or 3, schools are shut down. We're doing it virtually. Currently, we are in phase 4, which means in-person learning is being planned for the fall, which is what Richmond and the other 20 districts in Macomb County are planning on. In the plan, it talks about what districts need to do and are required to do. We need to provide an online option for parents if we are in phase 1, 2, or 3. We need to continue providing food distributions, childcare. Again, it goes through all the details of what happens in this phase 1, 2, or 3. As you go to the 4th page of the document, it talks about phase 4, which is what we're currently in. And it identifies what is required of school districts, in particularly face coverings. Again, if you have not read this, I strongly encourage you to look at this. It is on our website. It also talks about what we can and can't do in school. And throughout this whole document, it references the return to school roadmap. That roadmap is what I'm going to show you, I'll bring up next, which is this document. And let me just leave it down a little. This document is also on the website, and this is the document that the administrative team and myself are working with in order to put our plan together and finalize it, that ultimately has to go to the board. The executive order requires every school district in the state of Michigan put a plan together. Their boards of education must approve that plan, and the plan is then sent to the Department of Treasury. That's a little different than when we had the closure in March and the last part of last school year. The plans went to the Macomb Intermediate School District for Richmond, or the local ISDs, and they approved them. This is actually being approved by Treasury, who determines basically if the plan's accepted, then the funding will continue to flow to the school. If the plan is not accepted, it will be returned and we'll have to adjust it to meet the Treasury's requirements. But in the plan, it talks about, again, it gives you an overview. And I'm just going to scroll down. It talks about who is on the council, the process that was taken. It talks about what would happen in each phase. If we're in phase 6, it's in person. If we're in phase 1, 2, and 3, it is 100% online, a virtual school program. But if you go through the document, it will show you the different sections, phase 1 through 3. And I'm going to scroll down to phase 4 because that's what we're in. In phase 4, the plan that the district has to submit has to include all of these items. How are we addressing personal protective equipment, hygiene, how we're moving and spacing students in the classroom. And throughout the plan, you're going to see items like, for instance, on the personal protective equipment, there are required items that every district has to do. There are strongly recommended and there are recommended items. If a district cannot do the strongly recommended or recommended items, we have to identify that in our plan to the Treasury to let them know which ones we are not going to do or we're going to adjust. So as you can see, when you look at the personal protective equipment, that alone talks about wearing facial coverings, what grade levels are required to wear it, and so forth. I'm just going to go through the categories broadly, and again, I would strongly encourage you, because the difference between these categories, to read this, because the difference in the categories is just the level of required items. So for instance, in phase 5, which is less restrictions, many of the required are now strongly recommended. Many of the strongly recommended are now just recommended, and some of the recommended are now falling off and so forth, or remaining as recommended. It talks about how we screen students and staff. You'll see throughout this document that is a requirement of districts to work with their local health department. Last week, the 21 superintendents met with the health department, and we received the protocol. I'm going to call it a draft protocol of how their expectations of our school district screening students and so forth. So my administrative team and I will begin looking at that protocol and making some recommendations or with corrections of how it might be implemented in a local district. This is not an easy process because there are so many variables that we have to take into consideration. All the parents and administrators who are on the line know that operating a school is not something that's just done willy-nilly. There's a lot of thought. There's a lot of logistical concerns, particularly as the amount of students that are moving in and out of the buildings, between classes, areas such as lunchrooms, locker rooms, etc., that we need to take into consideration as we're developing our plan to try to minimize any exposure to students and so forth. So again, these are some of the topics that we have to address in our plan. Again, you'll see there's requirements. Those will be. One of the things that has come out often is the spacing in terms of conversation among parents and just in general. It is strongly recommended, it's not required, of that 6 feet spacing. Logistically, that is impossible to do in a classroom. We can do what we can to space kids out to try to minimize contact, but we don't, even if we could hire as many teachers as we want, we do not have enough classroom space in this district to have that requirement met, and that's why it's strongly recommended, and I don't know of any district that's going to be able to do that aspect. It speaks to food service, gatherings, etc. It talks about athletics and cleaning responsibilities, transporting students and busing, transportation of students and protocols for busing. And so I just want to touch on these the topics here, because all of these are what the administrative team has been working on. We have had teams of teachers in the building last week and when this was released, and talking about how we're going to implement this in Richmond. We've had board members who participated in some of the conversations and listening, because they ultimately have to approve the plan. It's a very short time frame. The governor released this June 30th. We began working literally with the administrative team the 13th, about a week after it was released. They've been back last week working with teachers, and we're going to continue working this week and next week to ultimately have the plan ready to go for the board at the August 10th board meeting. It has to be approved by the board by August 15th and submitted to Treasury by August 17th. So we have some deadline dates that are required of districts. You may have heard in the news, some districts have kind of released their plans and what they are doing. I have chosen to do this very thoughtfully and to get as many voices in the process as possible, because what's good in Richmond may not be the same as another district. And one of the things that we're finding is every single day items are evolving in the community, such as interpretations of these guidelines and so forth. And so what I don't want to do is send mixed messages to our families. I want to send out, once we've gone through the process and really thought through as much of the logistics as possible, to be able to put one plan together and announce it. So again, I would encourage you. It talks about the instructional aspect in phase 4. It talks about the professional learning that's going to be required of staff in phase 4, parents' input and support, and how we're going to communicate that to them. Again, it's quite lengthy. It talks about operations and facilities, making sure we're using appropriate approved cleaning supplies. Talks about budget and enrollment. Make no doubt, this return to school plan is there are items here that we have never had to account for from a budgetary aspect this year than we've ever had in the past year. So we did receive some dollars from the federal government, the CARES Act. For Richmond Community Schools, we received about $188,000. Of that $188,000, approximately $20,000 went to the private schools in the area, St. Pete's and St. Augustine's. It's one of the requirements that we are the fiduciary of the dollars that for our private schools, much like we are with Title I funds and Title II funds that they receive. Some of those dollars have been allocated because we anticipated a per pupil reduction. And so the remaining dollars of that CARES fund has been used for buying supplies that we're going to need to open school and get things ready. The plan also talks about the technology needs. We as a district learned a lot from the last shutdown and the ability to provide virtual learning for families. What we're providing for or going to be offering in the fall is very different than what we did this past March, April, May, and into June. And part of it is we want to make sure students have every opportunity to learn from their teacher. We appreciate everything that parents and community members did. This was kind of an overnight shift of thinking of how we educate kids. March 12th, we were notified we were shutting down, and March 16th, we were shut down. And so within the matter of 4 days, we had to rethink how we're teaching traditionally. So the plan then goes on into what happens in phase 5. Again, a lot of the required become strongly recommended as things open up in our community. So I'm going to stop there. And let me talk about what we have done, the third bullet of Richmond's plan and what we've done. I briefly talked about it. We have had administrators in. They have come in much earlier than they normally are scheduled to come in to begin working. We've divvied up the plan. Various administrators have different topics in the plan that they are leading the charge, if you will. We have asked teachers to come in, particularly on the instructional end, to talk about how we're going to educate students if we are in a phase 1, 2, or 3, as well as the virtual option for families that we're offering. And to date, I believe we have about 75 families that are looking at or want more information on the virtual option. This week, you'll be getting, those families will be getting kind of a summary of what it looks like and the next steps to take if this is the avenue that they want to go down. So what has Richmond done to date in terms of preparing, particularly when it comes to the cleaning of the facility, the screening of staff and students, and the personal protective equipment? I'm going to talk about it in two folds. One is from what the county has done for all 21 districts, and the second is about what Richmond individually has done. I'm going to start with what we did individually. Knowing that there was be a shortfall or a backlog of orders for personal protective equipment, Richmond ordered, our district ordered masks and face shields, wipes. If you recall, in March, we collected a lot of the wipes out of the classrooms because there was a need from the EMS and the hospitals for the Clorox wipes. So we had donated those. So we have purchased replacement wipes for the classroom. They're probably half-gallon jugs that have like 400 wipes in a container for each classroom. We have purchased hand sanitizers. Not only do we have the ones outside of every classroom, but we also purchased a gallon with a pump that for every classroom they have hand sanitizers. We purchased Clorox 360 machines, which are machines that can be used between classes or after school to go in and kill any viruses, not only the COVID-19, but also the flu and other viruses that we typically deal with in a school system. We have purchased thermometers for every district to do handheld, as well as temperature check stations that will be at the entrances of the buildings, as well as on the buses as kids get on. One of the requirements in the phase, the plan, is you have to have a system to screen students to get on the bus. We will have the normal questions that are asked. Are you feeling any symptoms? Have you had a cough? Or are you feeling ill at the moment? We will also have, it's a unit that's mounted on the bus as you walk by, and you either measure from your wrist or your forehead to take a quick temperature check to make sure nobody has a fever. And then you also have hand sanitizing stations, which we put on the buses. They have kids use hand sanitizer before they get on the bus. And at that time, we also have to issue masks for students getting on the bus. So we have currently 72,000 adult and older children masks. We have another 60 some odd thousand child masks that have been ordered. The numbers that we've gotten from the county, those masks were primarily bought by the county, though the district did purchase some masks to get started in case the mask supply was not here from the county. The buses transportation, our plan is to have windows open as much as possible, weather permitting, to keep the air circulation flowing. You know your kids best. When you've seen your kids ride buses, they talk, they socialize. We're trying to minimize any spread on that. A lot of the logistics of the plan of how kids enter building, what will lunch look like, we are in the process of finalizing that, and I say that because the administrative team and I have been working, dividing up the areas, thinking through logistically how we can do it. We know we cannot create an environment where kids are 6 feet apart if we're doing virtual student learning. So I do want to be upfront with parents, because I've seen that a lot on social media. But we can separate kids as far as we can to the best of our ability. So that plan is worked on today. It's all this week and next week. It will go to the board on the August 10th. I'd encourage you to, if you want to hear the plan, it will be presented to the board on August 10th. So log into a board meeting at that time, or if we're in person board meetings, please attend. I want to briefly talk about the online option. We learned a lot from that last shutdown, as I said. I am thankful that our staff, of what they did in a very short time. I don't think there's anybody in this organization that believes 100% that that was the best way to teach kids and learn, but I think it was the best way in a very short time that we had to put something together. what we're looking at for the fall for those families that choose a virtual option, and I'm making the assumption right now we're still in phase 4. If we're in phase 3, then the virtual option I'm going to talk about is what all kids would experience in phase 3. But phase 4 talks about in-person learning, and we're going to offer a virtual option for students. So basically what a virtual option is we are installing a camera in the center of every classroom in the district. We are going to be the only district in Macomb County, and I believe the state, that is installing this system. Our intent in the system is we want the students at home to still feel connected to the classroom. We believe that parents choose Richmond because of the relationship they have with staff. And so one of the things that we talk about is how do we, to the best of our ability, keep that relationship, keep students interacting with their students that are in the classroom, their teacher. So I'm gonna use a few examples, and I'll start off at the high school. If I'm a high school student and I've chosen the virtual option, you'll be given a certain form and deadline that you've got to make that decision. We're asking right now the plan, and it's not finalized yet because we haven't definitively said this, but we're looking at you have to commit to at least a quarter, and part of that is through the organization of the teacher to be able to do instruction both virtually as well as in class. And more details will come on this one. But if I'm a student and I'm in high school and I have chemistry and I have Mr. Slater as my chemistry teacher, I would log in through Microsoft Teams. We would provide laptops. We do have hotspots now for families that are struggling with internet or do not have internet capability. However, we do recognize that there are some areas of our district that there is no Wi-Fi. So we've got to work with those families individually. But if I'm a student, I log into Microsoft Teams first hour to Mr. Slater, and I can actually see Mr. Slater teaching in the classroom. Mr. Slater has the ability to move that camera to wherever he needs. So if he's doing a demonstration for a chemistry experiment, he can zoom in on that, and the students at home can actually see the instruction by the teacher. Part of the class might be a lecture style at the beginning. It might be a group work. So I might be paired up with a student in the classroom, and I'm on Teams, and I'm paired up with them through a laptop. And so the two students, one at home, one in the classroom, can actually talk to each other and do group work through Teams. When I'm done first hour, I log out of Mr. Slater's first hour, and I go to my second hour, and it might be Mrs. Smallwood's Spanish. And so the students would actually see Mrs. Smallwood. She would interact. They can talk back and forth to each other. The students in the classroom have the ability to see the students who are on Teams. It's a little more restrictive for the students at home to see the students in the classroom, but it's not impossible based on moving the camera. The class can have a dialogue. So let's say Mrs. Smallwood is doing a class discussion and she's talking in Spanish and she's calling on students to respond or say, or she says a statement in English and she wants them to say it in Spanish. She can literally on her computer see students that are virtually and students that are in the classroom, and those students that are virtually can interact with Mrs. Smallwood. When second hour is done, the student logs into their third hour class, and let's say it's Mrs. Wolf and she's teaching Algebra 1. Same thing applies. The student literally goes through their day as a virtual student logging in. All of the assignments, any handouts that would be given would be submitted through Schoology. It's both the teacher and the student, so everything's submitted electronically. There's no packets to pick up, there's no packets to mail and so forth. Now I say that, but there might be some classes where there may be a necessity to pick up a packet. And I'll use the example of art. If someone has Mrs. Kaganak for art at the high school, there might be supplies. Let's say you're working on clay sculptures and so forth, and Mrs. Kaganak gives out clay to the students in the classroom. There might be a time that you might have to pick up a packet from the school because you'll need those supplies. This same process would evolve in elementary school. If I am and I'll use Mrs. Ranger as an example, and let's say she starts her classroom with taking attendance. In all of these classes, whether you're kindergarten or 12th grade, the teacher takes attendance. So if you're there virtually, you need to be there at the beginning of the hour, and the teacher will take your attendance. If they mark the student absent, parents, you'll get that call from the automated phone line that your child was not attending, just like they were if they were in school. Some of the policies we're looking at to give a little more leeway, because we anticipate there may be a problem logging in or some computer glitch that prevents the student. So we're putting things in place that allow the flexibility, or at least the student to notify someone if they're having problems. For lower L students, if you're choosing the virtual, we're assuming that an adult is there with the student. We're assuming with maybe mom and dad have to go to work and grandma and grandpa are watching the students, or an aunt or uncle or so forth. So we're assuming that there's an adult there that can help the student. We would be issuing laptops. If you have your own laptop, you're more than welcome to use that rather than the school laptop. But again, it's the same process. Mrs. Ranger might start her day. She'll take attendance. So she'll go through and ask the kids online maybe what their lunch count is, etc. Maybe she starts her day by reading a book at the rocking chair. So the kids in the class would gather around on the floor, creating space as we're required to by the recommended component between students. But the virtual students the camera would turn in the classroom and it would zoom in on Mrs. Ranger reading that story. All the teachers wear the audio enhancement systems around their neck, the little microphone. That's what the students at home, that's how the voice is being picked up from the teacher so the students at home can hear. So Mrs. Ranger would be reading the book. She could be showing the pictures. She could zoom in on the book for the kids at home to see the pictures. The kids in the classroom obviously would see the pictures as they normally did. When she's done, she may go into a math lesson, and let's say she's using her document camera to project something on the screen, and she's talking to them about single-digit addition. The students at home, Mrs. Ranger would just move the camera so it would capture what image is on the whiteboard at home. The students at home would hear Mrs. Ranger's voice, explain it. They would see anything she's doing on the whiteboard, whether it's using manipulatives or just writing it out. Again, using manipulatives might be another case that we might need parents to pick up a packet, and it might be something that we're designing at the beginning of the year. Here's the manipulatives you're going to need for your virtual classroom. Again, those are still logistics that we're working out, because this is a new world for all of us in terms of interacting virtually with students and being able to make sure they have the supplies they need to do the instruction. But we're very excited about this because it's an opportunity for students at home to be interacting with their teacher, getting instruction by their teacher, as well as interacting with the students in the classroom. And all of this is an option that a teacher could have 5 students at home virtually and 20 students in the classroom. Now, if we go to phase 3, if the governor moves the state to phase 3, we are all 100% virtually. So our plan is teachers come into the classroom and they're teaching to basically an empty classroom, but all the students are watching that teacher virtually. So the instruction is identical. It's just 100% virtual from that aspect. You know, the same thing, the example that I gave at the high school and elementary school would be the same for middle school. If there's a recess break and the kids are going outside, the teacher might say, you know, go stretch your legs. If you can get outside, go run around, take a 15-minute break and come back in 15 minutes. Same thing for lunch. If the elementary school students are going to the music class, they would log out of Mrs. Ranger's class and log into Mr. Finley's music class, and they would participate in music. STEAM, art, computers. Again, it's going to be a little more challenging because they're not right there. Art might need supplies that are picked up. But again, our intent is to try to make instruction as real and natural as in-person as possible with the families that choose virtual. 2 weeks ago, we had about 60% of the teaching staff participate in the training, the initial training, kind of the overview of the system. It was well received. There are so many things that the teachers see as a positive. Take this whole pandemic, COVID, out of the equation. this system allows if students are just sick and they're normally, but they're still able to participate, but they can't come to school, they could still participate virtually. We deal with some students at the high school that unfortunately we have to suspend and they're out of instruction. Well, they could be at home, but still participating in instruction virtually. So there's so many options here. Teachers, they get sick too. They know that they're going to have to take a day off here and there. And a lot of teachers thought about this option allows them to record their lessons. So if a substitute comes in the classroom, basically the teacher can still teach and the substitutes there could be still there to manage just the classroom. Our plan is to bring in, invite every substitute that's in our system towards the end of August to train them on the system. And part of that's because we know we can expect, we don't know for sure, but I can expect that there's going to be a staff member that's going to have to self-quarantine. Something comes up and they've been in contact, whether it's their family, or we have a classroom that's going to have to be self-quarantined because of someone was exposed or someone tested positive, etc. So we want to be able to have the subs that are in the classroom be able to utilize the system and to know which students are virtual and which students are in person. Particularly if a teacher has pre-recorded the lessons and is teaching, the sub has to be able to manage the system that we're using. I'll be honest, I'm very excited, and I think the staff and administrative team are really excited about the possibilities of this online system and another option for families. Based on survey results, based on conversations I've had with parents who have called me and expressed their concerns, we have a community that is pretty much at all ends of the spectrum. We have a community that is very much taking every precautionary measure, and we have staff or communities that want kids back into a normal setting with very few restrictions and personal protective equipment. And so what we're trying to do is trying to accommodate everybody. I'm not going to make everybody happy, and the principals, and I know that. We have to follow the requirements. I've had a lot of conversation with parents regarding those requirements. My recommendation is contacting legislators who can, and through the process, hopefully make any changes that need to be required. I do want to touch on, we do have some families that have or are looking at the virtual option who may have a special, an IEP. Using a virtual option gives us a lot of flexibility to continue the requirements of an IEP and providing the services virtually as much as possible. And I see Mrs. Lashbrook here is on our session. So any family that does have an IEP, Mrs. Lashbrook and the team would be involved in how do we best provide those services. We might need to adjust some IEPs because of a virtual option, and I'm going to leave that up to Mrs. Lashbrook and the team. At this time, I'm going to open it up to any questions. I'm kind of giving you an overview of where this whole process started with the governor's executive order. We are going through and then the roadmap to school and identifying the things that we are required to do, that we have to submit the plan. One of the things that I find unique in the last shutdown is the plans are submitted to the ISDs and they approve them. It's interesting, this time the plans are being submitted to the Treasury, which holds the purse strings, if you will, to any per pupil funding and funding to the school district. So it's a little interesting twist how the state has done that. But either way, we're going to be in compliance, and we're going to make sure that we don't lose funding and that we can provide as many options for our family to meet their individual needs. So with that, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, or if for some reason there's a problem with unmuting, just kind of wave on the screen and I'll see what I can do on my end. So I will leave it open. Anybody have any questions?
I actually do have a question. What is it going to look like when, obviously with kids going back to school, they're always sick, and with COVID having such broad symptoms, if, let's say, little Jimmy has the sniffles or is showing signs of symptoms, does the whole class then quarantine until his COVID test comes back? Because we're still looking at days before COVID test comes back.
You're absolutely right, and that is the one thing that all the districts talked about with the health department, because in the phase it says that we have to work with the health department. They've given us some guidance, and it pretty much is, if someone has tested positive, there's a way that we have to react in terms of whether it's that class that has to be quarantined, or if you will, for the 14 days, or any classes that might have been in contact with that student. Again, in a school system, particularly at a secondary level where they're changing classes all the time and your kids are interacting in the hallway, just getting from point A to point B, what we're looking at doing is trying to minimize student interaction. We haven't made the decision yet, but one of the things we talked about is, do we issue lockers? And if we do we stagger the time kids can have access to lockers so that they're not all congregating in the hallway? And I see Mrs. Goods there regarding, she's subbed in our building. She's seen as a substitute now as a parent how many kids are in the hallways and so forth. So it is a challenge. We are working through that logistic, particularly regarding with the health department and how we interact, because in a school system we have kids that they get the flu, they just don't feel good, and some of those symptoms are the same symptoms that they're using for COVID. So I don't have a finite answer for you, because we're still working with the health department on the specifics of how we're going to address that. I did send out this morning to the administrators I got last week the first draft from the health department of how we're going to respond. There's some concerns that I have, because it is very broad in some of the concepts, that we would be quarantining certain classrooms, if you will, and sending them home and not having them report based on if there is an outbreak in the classroom or a positive case. So that is part of the plan that has to be submitted to the state. And so on the 10th, we will be outlining that plan. My hope is to have a draft of the plan up the week of the 3rd to get some input and give us a chance to make some adjustments to the plan prior to us presenting it to the board on the 10th. So this would give parents an opportunity. Again, it would be a draft. It's where we are, and if we had a board meeting the next day, this is where we would be planning. I can tell you a lot of thought, and it's pretty interesting watching staff interact and try to grapple through all of this, because there are so many to run a school. Kids are interacting. We cannot prevent that. And so how we clean between classrooms and those where there's classrooms that have multiple kids coming from different areas. Elementary is pretty good from, we can keep them together as a class. You know, they go to the specials together, they sit at the same lunch tables together as a classroom. If we have to divide recess times, or it's one class out there at a time, or two and they're in different areas, we can pretty much control that in elementary. It gets very challenging from the middle school and high school to try to operate a normal school day. Other questions?
Yeah. I have a couple questions.
Okay.
No.
Yep, I see you up there.
Yeah, a couple questions. One is having to do with band. If we go with the virtual option, what does that work for band? Are they going to have band, since you got to blow through an instrument and everybody's in an enclosed room?
That is one thing that I know the high school staff and I will be looking at in space-wise. Mrs. Shack and I and Mr. Castle and Mrs. Borwick at some point are going to have to talk about, because I believe band camp starts Wednesday. There's some concerns regarding that with the recent shutdown of some of the sports, because we've had some kids test positive. From a band perspective, we're going to space them out in that band room. It is a larger facility, but you are right. They are blowing. There's saliva going in through instruments. You've got spit valves on trumpets, etc., that are going to have to be addressed, and the cleaning between rooms. You know, we do have a choir room and band, so if we have to alternate, again, looking at the schedules, if it's even possible. So if Mrs. Shack is in at the middle school in the band room and the next class is choir, we can get the band room cleaned before the next group comes in. Those are ideal situations, but I'm going to be honest, there are some with just particular the number of staff, we're looking at bringing some of our evening custodians up during the day so that we have more custodial staff to help wipe down door handles and so forth on a continuous basis. And when you talk about band, that would be one that we'd have on our target to make sure it goes in and clean between classes, because of exactly what you talked about. Our plan right now is we're running all of our courses as we did with as many safety precautions as possible. But I do want to be honest, some of those strongly recommended we can't do physically. And again, I'll go back to the 6 feet apart. And we might be able to achieve it if they're in every aspect and remove some things out, maybe. But a normal classroom, we might only be able to give kids about 3 feet apart, just spacing them out. Other questions you had?
I'm in kind of a unique situation because what it is I have one child that has autism and he's in the MISD. In high school he's starting. So you get a situation where that's a split school to start off with. And then the other one is obviously in the middle school. And we're grandparents raising, obviously, grandchildren. So being that the case, we've been locked down ever since February. We're basically locked down in this house. So people come in and bring our food and everything else because we're in the highest risk category there could be. So we cannot have this come in the house. So we're probably going to be forced to the virtual option. But what do we do with this MISD thing?
Well, I can tell you this. Since the governor's order came out, and actually during the whole closure, the collective, there's 21 superintendents in Macomb County with the superintendent from the ISD. All of us, at least once a week, sometimes it was 3 times a week, we met virtually and we discussed options. We are trying to stay as a collective group consistent so that parents who have students in either multiple districts or who are in the MISD program and a student in the local district, such as your case, that we're offering similar platforms so that parents are have a consistency of knowing how do I log in and get my student's stuff who's in an MISD program versus Richmond's program. If they receive services, how are my services being received, whether it's speech and language, TC, etc. How do I get assignments and so forth? What are the virtual meetings looking like? As a district, Richmond, we're using Microsoft Teams. All of our students, 3 through 12, have an email that's issued to them, and it's part of the suite, if you will, that we have in our computer package. So that's what we're training all of our staff, and we will be training students on regarding the virtual. Now, MISD might use Zoom, such as this, or another platform, but we're trying as a collective group to be consistent. Like, for instance, in some schools in Oakland County have already announced they're starting the year virtually. I think Lansing Public Schools announced they're starting the year virtually. In Macomb, all 21 districts are starting in person and will have a virtual option for families. So we're trying to stay consistent because we know we have many families who have kids in multiple districts or who live in one district and choose another through school of choice. Other questions?
Yes, I have a question. If my daughter starts off with the virtual option, does she have the option when we move to phase 5 to then go to school?
What we're looking at doing is setting a time where kids want to swap. Maybe they were in person, they want to go to virtual, etc. And we're looking at that at the quarter breaks right now. So we're trying to, and part of it is just for the teacher to be able to plan how many kids do I have virtually, because they have to plan a little differently and get the materials to those students differently than they would in class. So right now, though it has not been approved and finalized, what we're anticipating is there's a date you have to decide. Are you doing virtual or are you doing in person? And what we're looking at considering is the first Friday of school. So you may start off in person, so, you know, something, I want to go virtual. Or you may start off virtual and say, you know, something, I can do in person's good. I'm good with the precautions that the school put in place. But once that date, we're trying to have families commit to that virtual or in-person option for at least a card marking. And then that's a natural break when, you know, units are being finished and new units are starting, that a teacher could easily then swap kids out, whether they want to go back to virtual or come back into the classroom.
Hi, Mr. Walmsley. I have a few questions for you.
Yep.
This is the clinical coming out in me. You were mentioning the screening questionnaire for the little ones that are in like the K through 5. Will they be answering the screening questionnaire themselves, or will that be up to the parents before school starts to help them through that? I have a preschooler and I have a 3rd grader.
In the conversations we've had as a collective group at the county level, there is an expectation that, particularly with younger kids, that parents are evaluating their kids before they send them to school. They as a parent, you know when your child's kind of off. They wake up and that cough that appeared and like, oh, that wasn't there yesterday, or they just seem different. So part of the screening is we are relying on before, if a parent feels those questions are, yep, my child passes them, if you will, or answered them correctly to come to school, we're relying on the parents to be able to make that judgment at home. For the older kids, we're going to ask them. Obviously, if I'm going to ask a kindergartner on the first day, who this might be their first day, they may not say anything, because kindergarten, sometimes they look at you with deer in headlight because they're scared or it's a new environment. So part of the process has to rely on parents making that judgment about sending their student to school.
Okay. And then will the children be allowed to wear their own mask into school, or will they have to wear the school-issued ones?
Nope, they can wear their own mask. Part of the requirements in the document says that if they're wearing their own mask, that they are washed nightly. We are assuming that parents are taking that precaution. We're not going to ask kids, well, did you wash your mask last night? That's going to be assumption. And part of our because there's going to be a letter in the welcome back that kind of explains all of this to parents, and it's going to articulate that we got to work together on this. And so as a parent, if you feel this mask is better for your child, you can wear and they reference it as a homemade mask, I believe, in the document, or that they can wear that.
Okay.
We do have the masks like Mr. Koshin has on there and Mrs. Borick. We bought the Richmond Blue Devil masks for all the kids. They may like it, they may not. We also have disposable masks if they forget their mask, or like I said, they can wear their own personal mask too.
I like those Richmond ones. And last question, if we do, hopefully not, if we do slide back into a phase 3 and we do the 100% online as we did the last quarter of school, again, I have younger kids, are we going to have to, for the high school and the middle school, they switch classrooms. So as you said, they'll be logging on to each individual classroom on the hour. Will we have to do that in kindergarten, or 3rd grade as well, and then preschool, or will it be like kind of learn at your own pace and have due dates for assignments again?
The elementary would be you log into your classroom teacher. So if you had Mrs. Walters or Mrs. Ranger, you'd log in and you would basically be part of that classroom. The only time you would need to switch would be when they go to specials. So if Mrs. Ranger's class at 10:15 goes down to music to Mr. Finley, you'd have to log into Mr. Finley so that the student could participate in music. And one of the things that came out, and I drawn a blank on which teacher suggested it, but trying to streamline this for parents. So for instance, if you have Mrs. Walters, you get basically a Word document maybe with links on it that says, just click on this link. This is all the link you'll need from Mrs. Walters. Every time we have music, this is the link that you're looking for music, etc. So that you don't have to keep searching for that. We're trying to put it all in one place. I don't know if it's going to be in a document that has a clickable link, or if it's going to be on the teacher's website. That we're still working out, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible for parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles who are watching the students for that day, because we know that's going to be happening.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. I mean, my husband and I are both in healthcare, so I don't know how I'm going to be at home for 8 hours a day for in classroom when I'm a nurse at a hospital. So it's going to be that's why I'm asking but I'm in the same boat as probably thousands of others. So thank you for answering that.
But I think what I think is the valuable part about our system is you are still connected to that classroom teacher. So the relationship you have with that teacher, they know things come up, or they know, hey, I don't have anybody, or the student's going to Aunt Sally's house and she's really not technical, so she's going to be out. The teachers know that, and they know that we're going to have to make some accommodation, and that's what I think is the most valuable part about this interactive system, is that relationship still is there.
All right, thank you so much.
No problem. Other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned it was funny about the technical end of it. What it is me and the wife being already 66, we are not technical savvy. And that was one of the things that was the hardest thing in the spring working with them, is because we couldn't, they would say, well, do this, do that. And we'd have no clue what they were even talking about. It's like a whole different language.
Well, one of the things that the IT department, one of the things the IT department is working on is creating a one-pager. Here's how to set up the system. So when you get home, if you're one of the families that needs a Wi-Fi, here's how to set it up with a visual and kind of as simple as possible. And then another page, okay, here's how to log into Microsoft Teams or Schoology, and to keep it as simple. We don't have dates yet, but we will be, because the parent survey that went out in June talked a lot about support for families. Not only if they need to come in and actually make sure they know how to use the system, maybe it's a virtual, maybe it's an in-person, but also a helpline. One of the things that we've discussed with the IT is that we're going to shuffle their day so that there's a telephone call that if a parent's at home saying they can't get on, they could call an IT helpline, and it goes to one of our 3 techs that allows them to walk you through and help you get logged in. Especially at the beginning, as this is new for everybody. So we heard that in the survey. We heard that from the parents in the first shutdown, as well as the second shutdown in April. So we want to make sure we have a support for families, because if we are in phase 1, 2, or 3, we're going to need parent support, or the grandparents or whoever is watching the students supporting it. Other questions?
I do have a second question. So with you guys asking parents not to send their children to school if they're feeling off, are you guys going to be a little bit more relaxed with attendance, or is it going to be expected that student is going to be online that day? And then another question, just to get it out real quick. I know elementary school students aren't required to wear masks, but can they wear masks if they choose to?
Great questions. I'm going to start with the attendance. The attendance, we are going to be looking at our attendance policy, because we know we have to adjust it. In fact, Mr. Castle at the high school was one that just brought it to my attention early on, because if a student, right now, if a student's late, and forgive me, I don't know the exact time, 5 minutes after the bell, they're marked tardy. After so many minutes, they're counted as an absent in the classroom. We know people are going to have technical issues, and so we've got to adjust the attendance policy for that. We also know that we're in a different environment than something normally, so when we look at absences related to COVID specifically, we're going to have to address that. So we are revising and adjusting the attendance policy to be more broader, so that we can capture and work with families that this is an issue. In terms of the mask, if students want to wear a mask, they can wear a mask. Nobody's going to be told that they have to take that mask off because elementary. If that's what their comfort level is, then they're going to wear a mask. From elementary classroom, particularly preschool, kindergarten, and first, we know kids like to hug. Kids like they want to be kids, and what we're trying to do is create an environment that still welcomes them and they feel safe in. But we also have to teach some boundaries, and that's going to be hard for some kids, because they love to hug their teacher, and as soon as they see it, they run up and hug or they're sitting on the floor and the teacher's reading and they're hanging onto their leg, and that's what kids do. We may have to have lessons regarding teachers if they're wearing a face shield. if I'm an elementary teacher, particularly at the lower L, personally, I'd probably want a face shield just because kids are kids. They sneeze. Sometimes they forget to cover their mouth. They cough, and you guys deal with them at home. We want to make sure our staff are comfortable. We have some staff that have a medical condition that prevents them from wearing a mask. So we're going to have a shield for them as an option. So we want people to be comfortable, but we do have to follow the requirements that are outlined. So they're not required in elementary school, but they can wear a mask if they want to.
What about face shields? Like we have face shields that actually clip onto like a baseball hat, which makes it more comfortable for kids. But I know kids aren't allowed to wear hats at school. Like, is that something that you guys would make exceptions for?
That's part of what we're going to have to talk about as administrators team. Maybe they've thought about. It didn't come up. Baseball hats didn't come up, but having them on the line, we're gonna meet and we're gonna go over those. And that's some things that we may have to lax, because if they're wearing a face shield with the hat, that might be the face shield that they need to wear. And so I don't have any doubt in the administrative team adjusting what we need to do to make this work and try to keep school and exciting for what kids want it to be. But we're in a little different environment, so we're trying to maneuver through that right now. So, that's an easy change. That's an easy adjustment. And to be honest, I think a lot of high school kids, I don't want to speak for the high school, but I think a lot of high school kids would love to wear a hat to school. Right, Mrs. Bork? Mrs. Lashbrook? So I see that's going to be one of our biggest challenges is kids who are required to wear a mask refusing to wear a mask, and how we address that. So if we can do face shields and maybe make it an incentive with hat, that might be something that we know we're going to have to address those issues. And it's going to fall under the student code of conduct and discipline, but we're trying not to go down that road. We're trying to work with families and help them understand that this is helping all of us and getting us back to some normalcy. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Okay, as far as the cameras in the classroom, are they going to be recording, for instance, like if you do have a technical issue and you miss half the class, is that going to be recorded to where you can go back and review it, or are you just out on that half a class that you missed out on? Or if both parents are working later in the day, once they get home, they can actually go through it with the students?
I would say this at this point. The general consensus, and if any of the administrators think it's otherwise, feel free to speak up, is the teachers see a value of recording their lesson. Some would like to pre-record them because they want to get all the bugs out and make sure it's a perfect lesson. Some see the value in, if I'm teaching at the high school and I'm teaching the quadratic formula, and I often use this example. And yeah, as a student, I may get it in the classroom, but when I go home to do the homework, I forgot. And being able to go back and review the video would help. So we are, I don't know if we're yet as a requirement, but I think we're close that it's an option, and that will be something we're still working out. But I would leave with this. A lot of the teachers see the value of recording their lessons for families to have access to and kids to have access to at a later point. They know they're going to have kids, maybe it's a high school kid that's doing this all by themselves, and now mom and dad get home from work and they help. I need help. And if you're like me, there's some topics that I haven't used since I was in high school. So I got to refresh myself on some of the stuff. So the recorded lessons would be beneficial. So I'm going to leave it with this, that it's not mandated yet, but we're going to have a conversation in terms of staff, and it may be something that we do require. But I can't say that at this moment. But I do know a lot of the staff saw the benefit of recording the lesson and having it posted for students to have access at a later point.
I got a point on that lesson there. What it is when our regular kids were growing up, one of them had to be homeschooled due to this situation. So with that homeschool program, that was the most ideal feature of the video homeschool program, was the fact that they watched the video, they did the assignment, and if they went, you know what, I don't think I totally understand this. And they went right back and watched the video again. And then they'd go, oh, now I understand what the teacher's talking about. But having that option to be able to go back, because like I say, it falls back on me again, 66 years old, even with this in the spring where they were kept saying, well, here, you should know how to teach him this or whatever to help him out. Heck, the math they're using now and everything, it's nothing compared to anything I did way back, 40 some years ago. So it was really a dark hole there. So I would really encourage the option of being able to see it again, because like I says, for the virtual ones, I know situations are going to come up where they're going to look at me and say, hey, I don't understand it. And if they don't have the option to be able to review it again to try to understand it, then we're already going to be, holes are going to start appearing all over the place.
Well, I think that's why we're having these meetings with parents, because we want your feedback. Well, from your perspective, particularly in the last shutdown, what worked, what didn't work. We want to tell you where we're at and give you the big picture. This is one that I'm sure the administrative team and I will discuss a lot, along with like face shields and the hat changing and attendance policy. Those are things we're going to have to, in the next week and two, adjust to make a recommendation to the board. So I do appreciate it, and we will be looking at it.
I was curious though too, since we had the band, not the band situation, but the sports situation where we got involved with COVID and everything there. That's a far smaller group than the let's say the whole school system as a whole, the Richmond school system. Was there something that failed there that's going to make it so it won't be so easy to fail in the classroom itself, or what exactly happened that fell apart like that?
Well, what I can tell you is, for the sports teams, according to the MHSAA regulation, Michigan High School Athletic Association, we screen athletes on a daily basis. They're supposed to take temperature checks and record, see if they have any symptoms and so forth, hand sanitizing, try not to contact. But when you're talking about football, you're making contact, or any of this.
Right.
What happened was, we had parents who reported to the school that their child tested positive, and that we then looked at what kids were involved with that, and they were in contact with the sports team. So nobody has shown symptoms or is any, but there's a possibility. And so with MHSA regulations, this is where the 2-week shutdown comes in. There's some guidance that the health department has done for schools to talk about, okay, at what point do you quarantine a classroom if you've got a positive case? And those are still, like I said, in draft form. We as an administrative team are going to look at them tomorrow regarding what the health department has given to us and give our feedback. And then we'll get a final version, because ultimately it's the health department that's taking over if there's a positive case. They're working with us and giving us guidance whether we're shutting down a classroom, or we're shutting down a school, or we're shutting down a school system. And I say it that way because each district is very different. In Richmond, all of our kids are together. I mean, they're ride one bus and they're all together. So shutting down an elementary school may affect the other two buildings dramatically, because parents may need older kids to be home with their younger kids to watch them. I mean, there's so many other variables. Where a Utica may just shut down a building because they're vast and large in numbers and so forth. But other questions?
When is the deadline for the sports? Isn't like July 29th a date or something to decide on if we're going to do fall sports, such as football and cheerleading?
Well, I'm going to answer that in twofold. One is, whatever the governor has decided what phase we're in is going to decide whether or not we can run sports. So, for instance, if she moves us to phase 3, which is virtual, phase 3, there are no sports. There are no after-school activities. Actually, phase 1, 2, and 3. So that's an automatic. If we're in phase 4, which we're currently in, and the MHSAA says we're going to push sports back, we would follow their guidance. Right now, we are planning on running school and fall sports as we were, and responding when we have cases of positive, when we know of positive cases.
Okay.
So the August, the kind of the 2-week shutdown right now, I believe August 10th is the official start of the fall season. It's the, you can do summer camps and you can do conditioning throughout the summer, which is what they're doing now. But I believe the first day that you can officially practice is August 10th. So the MHSA may come out and say, we're going to delay fall sports and move it to October 1 and not have anything run September. We would follow their regulations. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
The one
I
thing
actually
that
have one more question since
the
I
one thing
see
that we
Mr.
may-
Koshin sitting there.
The one thing we may
I'm
run
sorry.
into, though, with sports is if we have a situation in Richmond and we're playing Algonac, and if we are like, in a shutdown, I don't know if that automatically forces us to forfeit the game from a win-loss column at the high school level. Those are things that we're going to have to deal with, or any school district. If Algonac didn't have a team because they're in quarantine, how does that affect? Is that a game that's rescheduled, or is it just one team takes the win, one team takes the loss? Those are things that we follow the MHSA guideline.
Right.
Any other question?
I actually just had a quick one. I see Mr. Koshin sitting there. Are we still planning on having the 5-day preschool program, the new one?
I can answer that for Mr. Coach. Yes, we are. We are
Thank
still planning on running the preschool programs, the 5-day programs like we proposed in the spring, and the board approved.
Okay, thank you.
Where we are, I'll just give you the online for preschool. We are still working. What does that look like? A 3-year-old being able to sit in front of a computer is going to be very challenging. So normally a preschool is 3 hours, or if it's an all day, a 6-hour preschool. It might be significantly less, and the teacher interacting with kids differently from a virtual setting if we're in virtual. But our plan is to run preschool and run some type of virtual preschool. And again, it's more likely going to be a shorter time frame.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if I choose to send my kids to school, so I guess, is it like a hybrid situation? They can go to school, but maybe next week, maybe one comes on with a cold or whatever, they can do virtual for a week or two and then go back to in person?
The two models that we have as a district right now that we're proposing is in-person or virtual. However, in the conversation, we recognize kids are going to be sick. And when the teachers were talking about this, one of the things that came up was if a student is sick and maybe they have a cold, but they're still able to participate, the system allows them, they could possibly still be part of the classroom. So what we're trying to do is work out the logistics, because understanding, a teacher needs to be able to say, I know on this day I'm going to have X number of kids in the classroom and Y number of kids online, and to be able to prepare for that instruction. We do know kids are going to get sick. It's normal. We deal with it every day. We have families that, and maybe less this year, but we have families that they go on vacation part of the school year, that they're absent, or something comes up. This system that we're putting in the classroom gives us the ability to keep those students that are at home connected to the learning in the classroom. That is one that as an administrative group, we've got to finalize with our staff, what that flux going back and forth from virtual to in-person looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Are you guys doing latchkey this year then after school, or because that's usually mixing many classes together?
We are planning latchkey. There's some logistics that we're going to have to work out that we are still thinking through, because you're right, it is a mixing of classrooms in the morning. We do offer some during the day as well as in the afternoon, spacing them out. You know, the construction's starting on the elementary school in a couple weeks here, so we're going to have new exit doors that are being temporarily put in so they can add the additions on the elementary school. So that's going to be challenging in terms of space where we're putting latchkey, but we are planning latchkey, and they'll do the social distancing as much as possible. In that particular case, I could envision, though we haven't made the final decision, wearing masks in latchkey might be more of a requirement, just because there are multiple classes coming into one space, if you will. Other questions?
I have a question regarding masks. I know you had talked a little bit about masks in the elementary school, that they're not required, but what about the middle school, being that they're still 4th and 5th graders, and I think the requirement changes at 6th grade. Are they going to be treated as the younger kids, or is it just going to be a policy as the middle school as a whole?
The requirement states by grade level. So we have to follow the grade level requirements that are in the document. So 4th and 5th grade, while they're in the classroom, because those two grades are pretty self-contained. You know, 4th grade, it's one teacher primarily, and 5th grade, you have 2 teachers, but it's the same group of kids that are moving each throughout the day. So while they're in class, they wouldn't need to be required to wear a mask, but if they go out in the hallways or go to a special area, they would be required to wear a mask.
Okay, and now does that hallway and special area also apply to elementary school, or that's just no masks are required in elementary school?
Elementary would require, if they're moving from out of their classroom going to another area, they would be required to wear a mask. One of the things that we did entertain initially, but there was a lot of, when we did the positive and negatives, there was probably more negatives, is having the specials teachers come in and just stay in the elementary classroom. So really the kids never would leave their classroom. The art teacher would come in. We're planning on having kids go to an art room. And between the art room times, we would have a custodian use the Clorox 360 to clean the room prior to the next group coming in. So in that case, when they leave their class until they go to the art room, they would have to wear a mask. They take their mask off while they're in the art room because it's the same group of kids, and they put their mask on when they go back to the class. And then when they get back to class, they take it off.
Okay, and do you know, will they be eating lunch in the lunchroom, or will they be eating lunch in their classrooms?
Our plan is to space out the lunch tables and eat lunch in the lunchroom. We spaced out the cafeteria tables at the middle school, and just counting wise, we have enough to space them out, sitting approximately 2 per table, or 2 per bench, I should say, at the middle school, and we could fit a class in there. High school, we've got to look at possibly using the mini gym, which is connected to the cafeteria, and having a larger space so we can space kids out at the high school. At the elementary school, we could space kids out in the cafeteria by shuffling and forgive me, I would rely on Mr. Coach at staggering the lunches so that we have limited number of kids in the lunchroom at one time. Okay. Just as a reminder, we're trying to keep this as a normal school, but you're going to see things spaced out. You're going to see more hand sanitizing. You're going to see more kind of checks when you walk into the building. One of the things that's going to be that we're really going to have to look at is in the requirement. In phase 4, volunteers in the classroom are not allowed. That's going to be something that we're going to have to adjust and look at, because we're trying to minimize the outside people who may have been exposed with the kids in the classroom. That particularly is an elementary issue when you look at the number of, and we have a lot of parent volunteers. So we've got a couple ideas that we're going to need to backfill how we use some that we're in the process of finalizing for our plan. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. It's a little over an hour and 15 minutes. I thank you. We have another session at 2 and one at 7 tonight. I would encourage you, if you don't know, if friends haven't been on, encourage them to get on, ask questions. If something comes up, feel free to either shoot me an email or the principal. We're trying to gather as much information to do the best we can in opening our school with the resources and the support we have. I'm confident the staff have been very diligent in their conversation in terms of how do we operate in the keeping kids and the staff safe. And so I'm very proud of the way our staff have begun developing the plan and writing the plan. So with that, I will wish everybody a great day. Thank you. Take care.